Hey, Joe Zarzaur here with Dr. Malone. Today we're going to speak about medical tourism. I know that a lot of people saw in the news that there was a group of people that were trying to get a medical procedure in Mexico this past week, and they got abducted by a drug cartel. And unfortunately, two of the members of the group were killed. But it has brought to the surface this discussion about medical tourism, and I didn't really understand what that was until a couple of years ago. But basically, medical tourism is when people go shopping in other countries for medical procedures that they can get cheaper abroad.
Good morning, Ariel.
Good morning to you, George. Experts warn that traveling abroad for medical purposes can be dangerous. Medical tourism is especially popular for, as you mentioned, cosmetic procedures. And one mom says that her surgery in Mexico came at a life-altering cost. This morning, a warning from one mom to other Americans about the potential dangers of medical tourism in Mexico.
I'm permanently disfigured for the rest of my life.
Shannon Palmer crossed the border for a so-called mommy makeover, which included a tummy tuck, after researching a physician in Tijuana. But she says immediately when waking up from anesthesia, she knew something was wrong with her hands.
I'm waking up in agonizing pain. And it wasn't from the surgery I just had on my body. It was on my hands. My fingers were cold, numb, and I started to worry about the circulation.
The next day, her doctor explaining that heated saline bags placed on her hands during surgery to keep her warm had severely burned her.
When I got home, they told me the news saying that you're likely going to have an amputation on your dominant thumb.
According to the CDC, each year millions of Americans participate in so-called medical tourism in places like Mexico, Canada, Central and South America, and the Caribbean. With dental care, surgery, cosmetic surgery, and fertility treatments, organ and tissue transplantation, and cancer treatments among the most common.
There's also medical tourism within the United States where people go from one part of a state, which may be like Pensacola, to Miami that's more populous because they can get a procedure done cheaper there. And unfortunately, when the anecdote or axiom that you get what you pay for kind of thing is true when it comes to medical services too, because I have had countless people call me about Brazilian butt lifts and other types of cosmetic procedures they've gotten in a strip mall in Miami, where they basically do the operation in a makeshift operating room, and then they shove you off to a hotel, basically, and they give you some monitors and some drains to watch. And then they ask you to basically stay in a Hamptons Inn or some other motel, hotel type facility. And then they expect you to recuperate from major surgery. And a lot of infections obviously come about that way. And there's not a lot we can do for those infection cases because you can't prove where the infection came from. And unfortunately, many of those providers don't have coverage. And they've put all their assets in their spouse's name, usually. And they're just doing these mill operations where they're just running people through, charging them a lot less than what a reputable doctor with insurance would charge. And then they're ending up with these bad results. So speak, Dr. Malone, a little bit about medical tourism.
Sure.
And if somebody's considering doing it, what kind of things should they look for in the provider, either in a different country or in a different part of the state, to make sure that they're not selling themselves so short that they're going to get hurt?
Sure. So if you stay domestic, like if you're just going somewhere else in the state or the next state over, look the doctor up by name on the Department of Medicine's website. Look up their license, okay? And that's in the state of Florida. It's very user friendly. You can see if there's any prior filings or actions. You can see how long they've had a license, if they've been moving around quite a bit. So if it's a physician that you're like, it looks like they just got their license, there might be a reason why they just got their license in the state. Or
what I do is I Google Earth their address. If their address is next to a Subway, right? Or if it's in a shopping center with a 5 and dime and a payday loan, you probably don't want to have major surgery there, right? And there's probably a reason you're getting it for $1,500 or $2,500 or $20,000 cheaper, because they're not paying for insurance, they're not paying for overhead, they're not renting space in a medical facility or one tied to a hospital. so they can make sure that if there's an emergency, they put you in the hospital. So they're cutting costs that way, and they're just taking all the money for themselves. They're not doing any infrastructure. Yeah. Their staff is probably not trained well. They don't have the sterile equipment or the equipment that sterilizes their devices, and they're running people through. I'm hearing stories of people saying they're laying in a bed and it's got blood on it, and by that time they've already paid their money and they've already traveled, and they're not going to just walk out, right?
Yeah. A lot of them are cash up front before you get your appointment. Yeah. Yep. So going back, I would research the doctor as best you can. Research the practice. So whatever the name of the provider is, and some of the ones that Joe's mentioning, the names change as well. And there's a reason why those names change, because one gets in the bad graces of whoever the licensing authorities are. Okay, let's shut that one down and start a new one. So if it's a new provider or a new practice, that may not be the best look. See what it used to be, and you can look that up on Sunbiz in the state of Florida. Lastly, I would encourage you to look at in your area, your state, to see what news has been out there. And you can see that in your Department of Health website where, hey, there's been new restrictions on certain procedures. If that's the procedure you want to have, maybe you have to ask those questions. Okay, doctor, are you following these new restrictions? Like for Brazilian butt lift, as Joe mentioned, the fat transfers, there's certain volumes at a time. There's so many patients per day that a doctor can do these procedures on. So you'd say, okay, are you adhering to all these things? Because if they cannot tell you that, there's a chance that, they are cutting corners.
What are your procedures for sterilization?
Yeah.
How many patients do you do this procedure on in a day? Mm-hmm. Where are you going to ask me to recuperate? Yep. Who's going to officiate the recuperating process? Who's going to be in PACU with me? Mm-hmm. Who's going to put me to sleep if necessary? Yeah. Who's going to wake me up if necessary? What is the emergency plan if I don't wake up immediately?
Oh, good questions.
Right? If they can't answer those questions, great, then you don't need to be having this. Yeah. And by the way, I know everybody wants their Brazilian butt lift, but listen, is it worth being disfigured forever and potentially being killed by some infection that you get from this operation? Probably not. So maybe it's better to wait a couple years, save a little more money, and have the procedure with somebody that actually is tied to a hospital and maybe in your own town, or somebody that's board certified and has a long Google review history of nothing but praise, right? Yeah. That's how you know the difference between quality and sort of a flash in the pan operation, like many of these places in Miami are.
If you're dealing with just like non-medical personnel, like it's like a liaison, and you never really get to talk to the nurse or the doctor or the medical assistant, that's kind of a tell as well. Like they're salespeople. Right. This is not a medical provider. Yeah. So you want to get beyond that.
Like a Zoom call with somebody that's a liaison for the doctor, right? Yeah. And the next thing you know, they're just getting a bill, Venmo. They want you to do a PayPal or Venmo payment directly to the facility for the whole price of the operation, right? That is not how it works in normal affairs, right? In normal affairs with a plastic surgeon, you actually meet with the plastic surgeon. You're basically interviewing the plastic surgeon. You're deciding whether you want to carry out this procedure with the plastic surgeon. They meet with you in person.
You pick which hospital it's going to be at.
They talk about hospitals. They talk about what their risks are and the benefits, and they say to you, here's the risk of infection. Here's the risk of this. And they'll give you numbers if necessary, right? If they're not willing to do this in person or don't want to do this in person, then you shouldn't go with it. And another thing is, if it's 20 times less expensive than it would be in your hometown, perhaps there's a reason it's 20 times less expensive, and that reason is usually not a good one. So I'm sorry, coming from a malpractice standpoint, and the thing that you may think is your insurance policy is the fact, I'll just call Joe Zarzaur and we'll just sue them if they screw up. Well, guess what? You call me, I find out they don't have any insurance, and their trophy wife has all their, or husband, depending on what you're dealing with, has all their assets in their name, and they have nothing in their name. Guess what? There's nothing I can do for you. So you have a disfigurement, potentially a life-threatening infection, and we can't do anything about it.
Yeah, and I'll add all that stuff we just mentioned, all that homework you're doing. You leave the country, you add some other obstacles to that, language barriers, cultural differences.
Less regulations.
Yeah, so we're just talking really domestically. So the notion of leaving the country is like different level.
Yeah, it's crazy. Obviously, it depends on what country you're going to, but this is an extreme example where somebody gets abducted by a drug cartel.
Yeah.
I mean, so medical tourism, not a good idea. Shouldn't be a term because it means basically you're shopping too aggressively for your medical procedures. So there are some instances where medical tourism is important. Like if you're trying to find a specialist, it's only one or two in the whole world that do this kind of procedure.
You're going to a tertiary care center, like, hey, I went to
Correct. Yeah, within the country, you're going to UAB or University of Florida or Miami to get somebody that's affiliated with a medical school. That's a different kind of medical tourism, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, if you have a situation and you want to bounce something off of us that has happened, scenario, you can find us on the web at zarzaurlaw.com or you can call us at 855-HIRE-JOE. Thank you.